Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Nick Bois, CBE. Now, Nick is a former member of Parliament for the Conservative Party. He's an esteemed author. He wrote Confessions of a Recovering MP. And in October, I believe in 2022, was appointed chair of the British Tourist Authority. Nick, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Lovely to be here. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Where's home, Nick? Which part of the country do you live in?
Home is Bishop Stortford, or just outside of Bishop Stortford, very close to Stansted Airport, which I regard as a plus, because I think if you know an airport's been there for several decades and you live and move here, I can tell you there are huge advantages, and you get very used to the planes flying over.
Yeah, well, let's start with a bit of tourism. You've got this highly respected role with the tourist industry. What's your assessment, Nick, of the recovery of the tourist industry after COVID? Are you encouraged from what figures and things you see?
Gosh, we could spend half an hour just talking about that, but let me condense it for you. I first became chairman of what's known as Visit England, literally at the point COVID started, and it was a hugely traumatic and difficult time for the sector, which quite simply shut down overnight. Now, many people will recognize that, and it was in many ways the first to shut down, and in equally many ways one of the last to recover, with lots of travel restrictions being in place around the world. It's only recently that China have opened up, so you can imagine the scale of what affected the industry. Last October, as you say, I was appointed chairman of the British Tourism Authority, which is the national tourist agency, for want of a better word. And their job is to drive inbound visitors into the UK from abroad. So we're right at the front line of trying to assess the impact of COVID on the sector. In a nutshell, it dived phenomenally, and it lost over what most people regard as the 2-year periods around £158 billion of expenditure, and that's jobs, that's livelihoods, that's people's well-being. People often forget that the tourism and has a massive contribution to make to our well-being. That's made up of obviously domestic tourism, and our inbound visitors, something like 99 million overnight stays by domestic tourists alone in a good year. So where are we now, which I think is the thrust of your question, Alex? Well, it's a mixed picture, a pretty encouraging picture. We certainly, from inbound visitors, we are pretty much getting close to what was regarded as the last normal year, 2019, where visitors' spend is just shy of where it was in 2019. Now, of course, inflation's kicked in, so that figure's slightly misleading. In real term, in some senses, we've exceeded 2019 figures, but if you allow for inflation, we're below that. Visitor levels are still down on 2019, around 86%. So you can see there's a way to go. And the challenge, actually, Alex, is that we are essentially struggling, like many areas, to actually get enough people back to work in the sector. There's many people now, if they go out to restaurants, if they go out to their local attractions, whatever it may be, it's getting tough to recruit and keep staff. And that, in some ways, is going to hold things back a little while before they return to normal.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm somebody, Nick, who grew up on traditional seaside British holidays, and of course many of those places were going through difficulties anyway, weren't they? In the north, I can think of places like Morecambe and Fleetwood, and in the south, and places like Margate have seen years of kind of a decline, haven't they? So there's some big challenges, aren't there? Do you think that something like the Eden Project will actually happen in the north?
Well, let's give this in real context. First of all, yes, I do. But actually, one of our main goals at the British Tourism Association, probably more widely known as Visit Britain to people, is that something like just over half of our international inbound visitors go to London and the proximity to London and the southeast. For me, the huge challenge and the huge opportunity is to actually have more inbound visitors and domestic visitors going to parts of the country which have huge potential, fantastic offers. You talk about the north. Well, you know, go up. If you go up to Newcastle, just a short throw from that, you've got Durham. You've got the stunning coastlines of Northumberland. And yet something only like 4% of our international visitors go there. So the potential for, and I'm going to use this word, and I know it means so many things to different people, but if you like, the leveling up agenda, making sure that the opportunity, the wealth and the visitor spend is way beyond London and the Southeast is a key challenge. And things like the Eden Project are going to have a huge impact on that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the leveling up agenda. Do you think that is a real thing, Nick? I've asked people previously in politics and people from talk radio. Is it actually a reality, or is it just a soundbite?
Well, for me, it's fundamental, because I don't think you can achieve the sort of opportunities, the social mobility, and if you like, improve the quality of lives, which, for all the cynicism about politicians, which is completely understandable, you know, I've yet to meet a politician who didn't go into Parliament who wants to make what happens to people on their journey in Parliament and all the things that go wrong. I think we all know and are well documented. But what is less well documented is that sense of, for your contemporaries, for your fellow citizens. And the use of the term levelling up, I think, can perhaps sometimes do a disservice. But it is, I think, at the heart of probably most governments, that they would want to see that spreading of the wealth, because you know, you can't just spend money and support people as we do with social welfare programs and so forth. What people really want is the opportunity to work, have good careers, and watch their areas flourish. It's so much about place shaping and creating opportunities. For me, it's crucial.
Yeah, and just touching on the politics, Nick. Obviously, you were a member of Parliament, and you wrote this book, Confessions of a Recovering MP. Have you recovered?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think I probably have. I'll just, between you and me, Alex, and I'll tell you what I mean by that is, because my time was cut short, because the electorate decided I was in a London seat, and London swung heavily to the left. It has been going, what I would say, more to the left in politics since about 2005. You can trace it. And when David Cameron won in 2015, and he won a majority, quite a few London MPs started to lose their seats, and unfortunately by a few hundred votes, I think it was. That's what happened to me. So I had that, even though I'm quite long in the tooth, I felt cut short in what I wanted to do and achieve, and I don't think you'll ever get rid of that. But there was life before Parliament, and there's, in my case, a lot of life before Parliament, and there's definitely life after Parliament, and we can achieve many of our goals that way. One of the biggest things I got involved in came about when I knocked on the door of a constituent in the run up to the election that I got elected. And it's very topical, funny enough, we're having this interview today. I knocked on the door, and it was a horrific moment in a way, but a life-changing moment, when I realized I was interrupting what was effectively the wake of a mother who was burying her son, who'd been killed through knife crime. And I really was just vaguely aware of knife crime, Alex, at the time. And I tell this story, she'd probably put a different spin on it, but I just wanted to walk away. This was the worst thing you can do. You turn up in a rosette about to solicit a vote from someone, and she's got this story to tell about her son, who was, Godwin Lawson was his name, who was tragically killed. And she pinned me up against the wall. And David Cameron made a promise then that anyone carrying a knife would face a custodial sentence. And she said pretty much what you just said to me about levelling up. She said, is this just a soundbite, or is he really going to do it? Because you'll get my vote, but you let me down and you'll have me to answer to. And she and I campaigned for 5 years on the subject and worked considerably hard on it. And I've never really lost that sort of responsibility and sense of work that I do in that field. So yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating what your reply, Nick, because there's a lot of challenge for people in politics about integrity, isn't there? About and substance about whether they'll do what they say they will do and whether they can be trustworthy. Could you just say a bit, Nick, about the personal impact of being a member of Parliament? Because I think sometimes we dehumanize our politicians, don't we? And we just see them as kind of fly-by-nights or people. But just say a bit about maybe the mental consequences of being a member of Parliament, and also the fact of losing your seat. I mean, that must be quite a chastening and humbling experience.
Yeah, well, it is, because you're effectively being made redundant quite brutally, and often in front of all the people who work very hard to kick you out of becoming an MP, because it's a public announcement, takes place on a platform in a night, and you've got your family and friends there who didn't sign up for what you've just done, didn't sign up for that exposure, but of course turn out to be your staunchest supporters in difficult times. Well, look, I don't want to overdo this, because I think every politician kind of knows what they're getting involved in, not entirely. So they know that they can lose their seat. They know that goes with the job, if you like. But I don't think anyone quite can appreciate, who has not done it, the impact it has on your life. Now, in that sense, you think you know, but you go into Parliament, and I can assure you, your constituents have other plans for you. Your party whips, the organisers of your party, have other plans for you. The very institution of the House of Commons has plans for you, of which you really know little about and little understanding, and you are reacting to events an awful lot. So for me, because I was in a marginal seat, and I think this makes a difference, I could win or lose it on a small number of votes. I ended up thinking that I got into a sort of a disease. It was a condition I called MAD, and I talked about it in the book. Marginal agitation and despair. For a brief time when I was an MP, I thought I should be chasing votes, which is a bad place to be. I'm not saying this with any pride, because you start to do things because you think it might win you a vote. And you get this compulsive almost behavior. I must go to that lunch. I must do this event. And if I don't, then the 10 people there, they're going to tell their 20 friends, and their 20 friends will tell other 30 people who all live and they'll never vote for me. You get this crazy thinking. And of course, that distorts your judgment. And you quickly realize that's not what you should do, and you should try and prioritize the things for your constituency. For me, I was in a very diverse constituency. Why am I saying that? The reason I'm saying that is because, for example, there were all these different communities. I had a large Turkish-speaking community. They always met on Sundays. They had huge family events on a Sundays. Saturdays, if you like, I'd be meeting lots of other people. I'd be walking around the town centres. So it's a 7-day-a-week job, and everyone thinks you've got power to sort the problems, when in the brutal reality is you don't. You just have influence and access to senior people who might be able to solve their problems.
And when you lost the seat, Nick, and in those weeks afterwards, was there a moment of, well, what do I do now? You were quite quickly back into it, weren't you? You got this very responsible job with Dominic Raab working alongside Brexit. Did you feel you had a breather, or was it quite?
No, I was. I kind of knew, Alex, that there was a high chance I would lose my job, or lose my role as an MP. I just knew that was the brutal reality of it. I knew London politics, and I could see what was coming. Having said that, that didn't mean I went into it assuming that case. I just say I was real. So for me, it was less of a shock. It was a huge disappointment. Make no mistake about that. I knew I couldn't go. I was fortunate. I had started and founded my own business, an events company business, and it's still going today. But I'd left that, even though I've kept an interest in it. I left that, and I knew it would be appalling if I went back and said, "Oh, look, I've lost the election. I'm back now." That was just going to. They'd moved on. They'd done different things. But I therefore had a bit of money behind me, so I had time and I could think what to do. And I got involved in campaigning, as you say, in 2018, which was 3 years later, mind you. I went to work for Dominic Raab, who was the Secretary of State for negotiating our withdrawal agreement under Theresa May's government. That turned out not to go so well. 123 days later, he resigned. I was out of a job because I was his chief of staff. So I've certainly been active, and 2017, Theresa May lost, if in many ways, in many people's eyes, she lost the election. Even though she won it, she lost an awful lot of MPs. That's when I was getting pretty cross about things, and Parliament's reputation was lying in tatters. People were fed up with it. There was all this talk about, you're not enforcing the Brexit vote, you're all in it for yourselves. The reputation couldn't have been lower. So I wrote a book, because I genuinely believe that this is the best parliament in the world, which will bring a big smile to many people's faces. But I could go on, and I won't, hours explaining why you may be disappointed with this parliament, you may be disappointed with some MPs, but I say this is the best system in the world. And fundamentally, through lots of stories and anecdotes, that's what I tried to explain.
Yeah. And Nick, forgive me, I'm not a hardline journalist. I'm just a priest and podcaster, but people will want to ask me about your relationship with Dominic Raab, because he's
Yes.
in the news. Did you find him a good person to work with?
It's very interesting, because when I was the answer to your question, by the way, is yes. What I would say is that everyone assumes I was a really good friend of his, and actually I knew him in Parliament and we'd worked together on projects, but I didn't know him that well. I think he wanted me to come along because I was sort of older, basically, and he thought I'd probably be the sort of sort of experienced member of his team. So on the plus side, I saw this chap negotiating at the highest levels. I'd sit in the negotiation room with people like Michel Barnier, and who's people have probably forgot now. He was like all over the news every day, making our lives very awkward because he was negotiating on behalf of the EU. I'd sit in meetings with the Prime Minister, along with Dominic, regularly over these negotiations. And I was in every single meeting, well, yes, almost every single meeting he had with civil servants and guests. What I saw is very intelligent, articulate, and this is the extraordinary bit about what's going on at the moment. Absolutely courteous individual. Now, did he get grumpy and with me occasionally? Absolutely, he did, and I don't blame him for that. Did he put lots of demands on people? Yes, we were negotiating at the highest levels for the country, in a very, very dynamic situation. Of course, we would make demands of the civil service. And I'm going back many, many years. Well, I say many years. I'm going back to 2018. So, and I was only there for 123 days. But what I saw was a very, very clever man pursuing quite diligently his role, and he was challenging in that role, as he had to be, because he was going into the negotiating room and he'd want the very best evidence to support whatever points that had been made. But I saw nothing that could hint at the sort of stuff I've read in the paper. But having said that, I have to say I was there for 123 days, and that's obviously my take on it.
Yeah, and on Brexit, Nick, I'm going to just ask you a really honest question. I voted Brexit. Did I do the right thing?
Well, look, you certainly did do the right thing, and you're in the sense that anyone who exercises their vote and their democracy, in my sense, it's impossible to have done the wrong thing. You know, whether we look back in time and say the outcome was right or not, that's another matter. I think I voted for Brexit. I think that's probably no secret. What I would say is that we did underestimate, if you like, some of the issues. There's no question of that. I think, as in many campaigns, you can oversimplify these things. I think there has been a huge tendency to polarize each side of the debate. So there's no room for middle ground. And I've often found that. I think we've moved away from that now. But have you made a mistake? On the arguments of Brexit itself, I absolutely don't believe we have made a mistake. Did we make some mistakes in negotiation? Could we have started a better relationship with our, if you like, our EU neighbours sooner, more quickly, less antagonistically? Probably, although I would still argue if you didn't treat them tough, you would get a bad deal, and I think the evidence would support that. But to have done the wrong thing, the simple principles of being an independent country, of trying to cut yourself across the world stage rather than just as part of a European group, to hold accountable the politicians, whether you like what they've done or not. You can hold these guys in Westminster to account by kicking them out. We could not do that with the European Parliament the European Commission, but we could, of course, get rid of European MEPs. The thing is, they don't really do anything. You can't even introduce a law into the European Parliament. You can amend proposals, but you can't introduce a law. Like I introduced a law on knife crime in Westminster. I couldn't do that if I was the MEP. So we're holding to account people who've got very little influence. So for me, the democratic deficit, the issue of, for me, for trade, which is the one that most people are focused on, time will, I think, prove we've got it right. And you're beginning to see that in the last year.
Yeah. I mean, my worry, I worry about whether I made the right decision. And I'm going to use a very, very, very basic analogy, Nick. It might surprise you. Through the jar of a jar of Robertson's marmalade, which is my favourite breakfast accompaniment, and I paid £2.30 for a jar of Robertson's marmalade last week, and I couldn't believe that. I pay it because I love it, but I couldn't believe how expensive it was, and I came away thinking, is this because of Brexit? Is this because of Ukraine? Is this because of bad management, poor governance? And I really don't know the answer. What would you say?
Well, I would say, as in just about everything, there are so many reasons why your jar of marmalade has gone up that it is difficult to pin it on one thing. However, okay, let's deal with the Brexit thing first, if you like, the implication on Brexit. I think what Brexit taught us, actually, which has been absolutely underlined by the Ukraine dreadful conflict in Ukraine, is that we only grow 30% of our food and requirements here in the UK. We get 30% from Europe, and actually it's slightly more than 30% because it doesn't add up to 100 otherwise, and the balance from the rest of the world. Therefore, we are at the mercy of both any regulations about importing stuff in, which is the Brexit bit that will have added a little bit of cost, I suspect. But the other truth of the matter is we're at the mercy of where all these products are that we don't have the resources to produce. And that's where you're seeing food inflation at some staggering levels, principally because of the supply issue, which is down to the Ukraine war, principally because of the complete huge swell of demand that came post-COVID. Just imagine what happened when suddenly everything shut down, then it opened up again, that demand kicked in. Will it settle? Well, we're starting to see for the first time last week, milk prices were reduced in the supermarkets. So, and I could name some other examples. Will it settle? We just had so many issues conflated. I couldn't look you in the eye and say, and no one should look me in the eye and say that that's all down to Brexit. It isn't. Has Brexit had some impact? Of course, it would have logistically made some foods, I suspect, because of the heavy bureaucracy, more expensive to bring in. That is probably true. The proportion of what I'm saying, though, it's relatively very small.
Yeah, I think, Nick, I'm caught between capitalism and socialism. I was raised in Worsland, a very beautiful village where the Prime Minister was at the weekend. But I now find myself working in a highly deprived urban setting. And so I feel like I've had, I don't mean it this way, but the best or worst of both worlds. And I take your point about the war, but when you see petrol increase in the way that it did, and the profits be extraordinary for people like Shell and British Petroleum, that's where I have a concern. That's where I think, well, the rich are just getting richer here, and the people who are struggling and really not coping. What's your take on that, Nick? How do we redress that balance? Because it doesn't seem any way level in any way, shape, or form.
No, and I understand that sense of frustration over it. I look, I'm like you. I am a capitalist. I believe the free market has a huge role to play in our lives. But I think when the free market fails us, I do believe government have a job to intervene. And sometimes, though, when they intervene, they create more problems. That's basically the flaw with the government intervening. But I'd rather that perhaps than not. So when it comes to petrol, I couldn't agree with you more. I found myself articulating the case for a slap it on windfall tax is something that is alien to me as a conservative, but I was having a part emotional, but a part understandable reaction, logical reaction to some of these excess profits. Now, where I think it fails is, for example, the government on petrol should be actually doing what Robert Halfon, the MP for Harlow, argues, is that actually we need a regulator to come in to make sure that when oil comes down, it's getting passed on to us. How often have you sat at a pump looking at a price, knowing that 2 months ago those prices came down, but you're not seeing it on your forecourt? That's a side of capitalism none of us like to see. And if it needs a regulator to come in and say you're not passing those costs, they should do that. The other thing, though, is I mean, the defense of an oil company, someone would say, well, they are paying more tax than anyone else when it comes to corporation tax. That is true. That's even before you apply a windfall tax. So when people are making this money, we should take some comfort that we're taking a large chunk of that back. The question then is, are the government spending it wisely?
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. I mean, this half an hour has absolutely flown by. I've really enjoyed chatting.
I waffled too much.
There's a couple of things I just want to touch on. I want to talk about talk radio in a moment, but yes. This is the Godcast. I just wondered if religion has been part of your upbringing and your life, Nick, and whether you feel the church still has an important role to play in society as we are today.
Well, I was sent, because my father was RAF. In those days, you had a thing called direct grant. And I was sent to a Methodist boarding school, and I've got to say that didn't set me up well for religion. It was very much the sort of compulsory, you will attend, you will do this, and being an instinctive rebel at heart, as some of my parliamentary votes will show you, I immediately pushed back. And I wouldn't sit here and look you in the eye and say, I am a practicing Christian who practices, and my life is my daily life is guided by the Bible and by the teachings. I wouldn't say that. What I learned, particularly during my time as an MP, but long before that in many ways, is how profound faith is amongst all the communities that I represented, particularly, and it was the largest community from the Anglican community. And for me, it presented itself in many, many ways through the more obvious, the acts of kindness, the generosity, the community coming together to supporting. But I also found it, being in the London borough, I found it really quite heartening, and I learned a lot from it about our basic principles of respect, of encourage, of even, if I might say, not just putting out the helping hand and giving people something and supporting people in that sense, as you might say, in just a purely simplistic charitable, here's something, here's some money, here's this, here's that. But how actually a church came together to help build and reshape often broken lives in practice, filling gaps, whether it was for looking for people who were looking for that sort of help, or more practical daily help, the childcare situations. And I looked around and I suddenly realized, to me, where religion was something that just happened in a church and I was ordered to go along to, it had breathed a huge relevance into our daily lives and our daily communities, often doing things that government never really had a chance or would have the capacity to get involved and help people out. And that's why I spent a lot more time than I ever envisaged working with churches right across all faiths, actually, in my one-time constituency.
Yeah, and I must just ask you, because quite a lot of Christians do watch this, and somebody who is part of inclusive church and supportive of same-sex relationships, the church has got some challenges ahead, hasn't it? And there has been some talk from some members of Parliament about the church actually being de-established if it doesn't kind of conform with society. What's your take on this, Nick? Do you think that the church should be of the time, or more of tradition and scripture?
Well, I think the church needs to be true to itself, doesn't it? It's got to be authentic. of course, we all have to move with the times. Look, I'm a member of the Conservative Party, which has the oldest political party in history. It has moved and changed with the times. Of course, it should. But I would say any organisation and has to retain its authenticity. And to do that, I think you have to have genuinely a consistency of beliefs and values. But that same organisation, you might say this is sitting on the fence a little bit, but which I never did in my parliamentary career. But actually, I think what it has to do, it has to make those judgments confident that it's sticking to things that it regards as its true values. So I don't think a politician necessarily should be dictating to any church what it should and should not be doing. I think that would be wrong unless it's illegal or unless it's illegal. But because I think fundamentally that is an intrusion too far. It can advise, it has its opinion. We get opinions from the Archbishop of Canterbury that often make me pretty cross, frankly, as a politician, but I would never stop his right to argue them or say them. And I think that mutual respect should go both ways. So it'd be a huge step to start talking about de-establishing the church, although we could probably have a long discussion on the role of the state and church, which of course goes back centuries, and of course its role in the House of Lords particularly.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Wise words for us all to consider. You've been now, you've been how much you're enjoying the role at Talk Radio. It is my radio station of choice. I've been very fortunate to have a number of your colleagues on as guests on the Godcast. Are you enjoying that role?
Yes, I do. I had a full-time show up until the summer last year, and then for reasons of my own, I took a step back. And said to them, and left very much as friends. They're starting to use me more for cover. It was fantastic over the Easter period. I really enjoyed that, doing that. And I've got some more slots coming up. So I just don't know when they'll be or where they'll be. But that works for me now because I'm very active in quite a number of things.
Yeah, but you're part of a kind of a new culture, aren't you? In terms of a 24-hour a day debate. Do you think that's a good thing? I sometimes think that we sometimes overtalk things. I just wonder what you think about that. You're probably going to say you're in the job. But,
we're also in the age where people are, often looking for the quick clip that goes viral and all this sort of stuff. I think we can talk things to a point of exhaustion, but not to the point where there's nobody out there not wanting to hear them. I am absolutely staggered, thrilled, pleased, and often shocked at how many people still want to ring in and have their say on an opinion. And in a way, that's a reflection, maybe, that even our politicians need to be more engaged. Because if there are people hungry to express their views on live radio to someone, in my case, if we're talking politics, they may not agree with me, but I generally know enough around the subject so that they're picking it up, prepared to have a challenge at me or support me or whatever. That would suggest there's an appetite out there for the politicians to do even more outreaching and talking and above all listening. It's often relatively wise words, isn't it? We were born with 2 eyes, 2 ears and 1 mouth, and perhaps we should use them in that order.
Very true, very true. And Nick, I just want to ask a couple of quick final ones. Yeah. Obviously, I guess you're a big family man, but where does the CBE rank in kind of moments of joy and pride for you? Tell us a little bit about that. It was a great
surprise. It was a lovely surprise to get it for some of the work I'd been involved in. As a family moment, it was right up there, only curtailed by the fact I could only have 2 of my 4 children there, none of the grandchildren, and my wife. So obviously that was a shame, but it was inevitable. Look, it's not I think in terms of outside of family, which I'm hugely proud of, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is having started from nothing, my own business, and running it literally with a credit card. And a client, in fairness, and we turned that into a business, employed lots of people, and I was always conscious that you know, whenever we employed someone, we were much more than just having someone do a job. We were a key part of their family. We would provide the sort of opportunity and hopefully the satisfaction and the money to help support them. It was great. I loved employing people, and watching the business grow. So I'm very proud of that. But I would say the CBE was, if you like, probably near the pinnacle for a moment of recognition of what I've been doing in public life, and that was great. I was thanked, but it has its place.
Yeah, well, congratulations. It's a great honour. Nick, I just want to finish with I'm a huge fan of the British Isles. I have a 30-year-old camper van that my wife and I love going out and exploring. I'm going to ask you to maybe suggest a hidden gem. I'm going to give you one. Maybe not a hidden gem, but last year we went up to near Inverness, and about 10 miles out of Inverness, we found the most glorious place called Findorn Beach. I don't know if you've been there. Just near Forres, a little town called Forres. Absolutely beautiful, golden coast, beautiful beaches, lovely weather, swam in the sea. Go for it. Where's your hidden gem, Nick?
Well, I think it's I've mentioned it already, so it's a bit of a disappointment to you. But people, I went to Germany recently to attend an exhibition where Germany's quite a key market. Lots of people come over from Germany to us, and they love our coastlines. And I think we have some of the most dramatic coastlines in the world. Now that might seem like an overreach statement, but enough people come here because they like them. So I'm just going to say this to you. You probably don't know this, but I think it's now open, or it's very, very shortly going to open. We actually have a coastline walk of all of England. Wales has one as well already. And if you combine the two, it's something like 2,000 miles. You can walk around the coastlines of our country. Stop in Northumberland, particularly. It is absolutely stunning. And it's no, by the way, it's interesting, isn't it? Quite a lot of dramas are being made now in the northwest and northeast because it's got this stunning landscape, which I'm really pleased. And make sure you stop at Northumberland and come back to me when you've done the 2,000 miles around the coastline. I think you'll find it quite fascinating.
I'm not sure I'll get to that, but Holy Island is absolutely beautiful up there. But you must make sure you go when the time.
Is it the wildness you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's beautiful. I think that whole coastline is beautiful. I like Holy Island because it's very spiritual and it's got a lot of history there, and it's got the links to Iona and obviously Durham Cathedral. So, yeah, and it's a place I only discovered in recent years, but it is absolutely glorious. But I've recently just been down to North Wales and around Betsy Coed and around there. There's some absolutely beautiful places, not on the coast, obviously Betsy Coed, but Colwyn Bay, absolutely beautiful, really beautiful.
I mean, do you know, it's fascinating now. I think it's 1 in 3 people more are now considering having a holiday in the United Kingdom. And I'm not surprised, because it sadly, it took the pandemic, it created a bit of a mind shift about people suddenly looked closer to home.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic, and it's wonderful to have. It's sustainable, and if you go there, maybe just stay an extra day or two as well. That all helps support the area. And of course, we all know some of the more sort of popular places, the hotspots, as some people would define them. And within miles of those, you've got, as you say, such stunning offers like Holy Island.
Yeah. Nick, thank you for coming on the Godcast. I've really enjoyed meeting you and chatting to you today, and wish you well with all what comes next with the business and media and everything. So, Nick, thank you so much.
I look forward to you calling in on Talk Radio. Talk
definitely.
TV, we should say.
Yeah. Okay. God bless you. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.